Well, 30 years ago today, the Grateful Dead ended because Jerry Garcia died. The next day, August 10th, 1995, on VH1, the weekly series Four on the Floor, hosted by Anthony DeCurtis, had other critics that talked about stuff. And this week, of course, they talked about the Grateful Dead and Jerry's passing. So the other critics were Amy Linden, J.D. Considine, and then Scott Poulson Bryant. And special guest star, Branford Marsalis, who talked at length about playing with the Dead, accurately predicted the archival releases, allowing the band's music to live on forever. And even there was a very intellectual discussion the day after Jerry died about people carrying on the Grateful Dead name and music and vibe. So those conversations have never ceased.
Within hours of Jerry Garcia's death, crowds gathered for vigils across the country, from Golden Gate Park to the Lincoln Memorial. Here in New York, to talk about this great loss, we've gathered our usual panel here on Four on the Floor. We have J.D. Considine from the Baltimore Sun, Amy Linden, a music writer who writes for the New York Times and other publications, Scott Poulson Bryant, a senior writer for Vibe magazine, and we're pleased to have with us today Branford Marsalis, who, in addition to his own individual career, quite remarkable, has played with the Grateful Dead on many occasions. Thanks for joining us, Branford.
Pleasure to be here.
Branford, you've played in all kinds of situations. You've played with Sting, you've played obviously on your own jazz records. What was special about playing with the Grateful Dead? What was special about playing with Jerry Garcia?
Well, the Dead were essentially a 60s rock band, so it was almost impossible to have a band in the 60s that wasn't influenced by jazz. Not that they were going to be great jazz musicians, but they grew up listening to that type of music, so there was a very improvisatory, experimental nature to the way that they played. It was very interesting to be on the stage with them, because they play the song and then it would just take off.
But wasn't Garcia also like one of the last great melodic improvisers? I mean, because a lot of jazz players today play on chords. That is, they play almost an abstract version of the song. But he developed the melody in a way that really goes back to the 20s almost, doesn't it?
That's the challenge about advanced harmonic playing, though, is to find a way. Even, for instance, you have a composer like Stravinsky. It's still very musical, even though it's not musical in the conventional sense. And Jerry actually experimented more without being too overly technical. There were times when he would play a lot of chromatic things and things that he thought really worked against the grain. He was a marvelously gifted melody maker. He was a great soloist, and his solos were very musical, particularly on the slower things. It was a joy to play with him, and it was actually more of a joy to listen to him. And his songwriting was very much like his playing. It was quirky, and that's what I enjoyed about listening to his songs.
Right, that's the word. Quirky is a good word. I remember the first time I heard Grateful Dead, I remember thinking, not knowing who the group was, and hearing it, and first thinking it was an R&B band, and then thinking it was kind of like this jazz fusion group, just like no one idiom really defined who they were.
That's what they are.
Right.
That's what they are.
Right.
It's really sort of like something that happens on the stage. What was it like being on stage at that moment? They're famous for, the shows. Was it great every night? Was it?
Oh no, it wasn't great every night. Some nights it just implodes. It would just crash, and it'd be a ball of confusion. But the first time I played with them in Nassau Coliseum, it was a very special night. It was really on, and it was probably tough to play with the same guys for 25 years. But every time Bruce Hornsby played with them, or when I played with them, they seemed to get a little perky. They were real cool about it. Like, hey, what's up, man? Jerry, hey, man, good to see you. Yeah, and they start playing, and it would kind of have an edge to it that I really enjoyed.
They had a special relationship with their audience too. I mean, could you sense that energy, that kind of thing happening when you were on stage with them?
Well, they have an audience. They've done something that is completely rare in today's society. They are the last of the band. Well, there are other bands, for instance, the Black Crowes are starting to do that. They are a band that has gone out on the road and earned their audience, and they've earned their audience strictly from a musical standpoint, and it's not a media-driven success. It's not a marketing tool. They went out and with virtually no visual representation in terms of video or interviews or television articles on them, they went out and sold their own tickets, sold their own albums, and consistently sold out 18,000 seat or greater seat venues, based sheerly on the reputation that they had in the eyes of their fans.
And also, I'm sorry, I was going to say it also, I mean, the thing that sort of went with that was that it was kind of a crapshoot on what they would play and how they would play it and how it would go. And I mean, because I know from talking to people who like went to lots of shows, they would like keep score, like baseball fans would.
Yeah, they do.
Right.
They know how many times. When I played Dark Star with them for the first time, I saw a guy. It was amazing to me how immediately I became like a member of the band, and all these rumors that I was going to join the band. And people would call me on my home phone. Hello? Dude, heard you with the Dead the other night. You realize, of course, they hadn't played Dark Star in 6 months. We're everywhere, man. You hear from you hear from some other, I'm like, get out of here. You know, ring, hello. Dude, you know, it's like amazing.
Like, ultimately, that's the most interesting thing to me about the Grateful Dead. I mean, the way that the fans, in a sense, were the band. In a way, the relationship was that, like, integral to each other. Like, he has a great quote, Jerry Garcia, about, he said about licorice. He said, we're like licorice. Either there are people who like licorice, there are people who don't like licorice, but the people who like it really like it. Mm-hmm. And that's really impressive.
Well, it's different. I mean, it's different because first of all, they're an anomaly in today's society because they're an old band. Mm-hmm. You know, they're old guys. They're well over the age of 25. You know, well over the age of 25.
Kids are over the age of 25.
Yeah, you know, exactly. You know. So you know,
many of their fans aren't over the age of 25, though, which is interesting.
It's different when you're selling music to teenagers who are fickle by nature, or when you're selling music to college students. And when you've transcended that and you have actually withstood the test of time and you're selling to everyone. Mm-hmm. So 40-year-olds are buying it, 19-year-olds are buying it, 30-year-olds are buying it, 20-year-olds are buying it, and they're buying it based on the reputation that the music has, rather than what it represents to their society or like a Generation X type thing. It's actually a musical event.
Right. When I did the last Rolling Stone interview with Jerry Garcia, and one of the sense I had about him was that this total kind of childlike openness. Would you say that was characteristic of him on stage, or him as a person when you were around him? Could you describe what he was like?
I don't know if I could call it childlike. I know what you're saying when he talks, but musically, he meant business, man. He didn't smile much on stage. You know, when he and I would hook up on a little line, you know, he'd give me a little smile grin, but a little sly grin. But then, you know, it was like that, you know, like that jazz thing again. It was like a taciturn acknowledgement of a little achievement or success, but then it was back to the matter at hand. You know, they were serious about their shows, and when they weren't going well, I mean, they'd get after each other during that. What the hell was that? What were we doing? This sounds awful. Let's do this, you know? And I really liked the idea that they would just get out there and call songs.
Right.
You know, like certain people would say, okay, it's my turn to call songs, and they'd like, you know, Phil would start playing the bass line, or Weir would play something, and the song would start, and then the fans would say, oh, I know that song. It's not like with some people you follow around, you know you're going to hear the same songs in the same boring sequence night after night after night, because that's more of a show. It's not a concert. They have a show and they have lights, and I mean it was like all of it was like being in the Twilight Zone on that stage. You know, the PA system from the 70s, the lights are real, you know.
Like the way the Grateful Dead would take intermissions and do shows in 2 parts. We're going to take a break now, and just ahead on this special edition of 4 on the Floor, we'll be talking about the cultural impact of Jerry Garcia and the Grateful Dead. To be about rebellion.
It's a commercial crap.
This is a special edition of 4 on the Floor, a tribute to Jerry Garcia. One of the most distinctive aspects of the Grateful Dead is the culture that grew up around them. Grateful Dead shows were like a movable feast, moving from city to city like a pilgrimage. Deadheads were not just fans, they were part of a community. For 30 years, the Grateful Dead has been one of the most successful groups on tour. What accounts for their sustained popularity? Is this musical excitement or a longing for a more innocent past?
And the trip of the hippies is generally an unusual one.
Haight-Ashbury. It was a mystical Mecca with a psychedelic soundtrack. and the beginning of a long, strange trip for a band called the Grateful Dead. It seemed like we were the house band for the 60s, so it was sort of like our party. We knew that we had something right from the beginning. As soon as I heard Grateful Dead music, I knew that it was power. The Grateful Dead turned this power into a cultural phenomenon thanks to the unlimited devotion of its fantastic following. Deadheads are really an invention of the Deadheads, not an invention of the Grateful Dead.
The fans, a lot of them wear the tie-dye stuff and all that kind of stuff. I have never understood that. I hated tie-dye all my life.
This is the way the world should be. This is how we should live. All be together. We're all a family.
It's a whole world unto itself that has its own kind of sensibilities.
It's music and art that's generated from the band to the crowd, back to the band and back to the crowd, and it just keeps going back and forth.
It's just everything coming together in one big collage. And if you were to actually put it down on paper and explain it, then you would ruin the whole thing, because it's unexplainable.
To outsiders, the Deadhead phenomenon has always defied explanation. Is this a musical community or a nostalgic escape? And with its guru gone, what's the future of this extended family? JD, what's the significance of all that Deadhead culture? You know, what did all that mean?
Well, it depends on how you're looking at the question. I mean, what did it mean for the music community at large? Actually, not a great deal, because there was kind of an independence and almost hermetic quality to the Dead universe. That it's not like you had Dead fans spilling out and influencing a whole range of other acts in the way that, for example, Beatle fans did or Rolling Stones fans did. There have been in the last 5 years some groups that have grown up with similar cultures around them. But Deadheads are pretty much a nation unto themselves. But within there, a friend of mine who is a Deadhead kind of explained it very well to me. She said that one of the things that was really cool about being in the Dead audience is you're among people who, like yourself, don't feel comfortable fitting in elsewhere in the world. But you come together in a place that's like a big family where you can be who you are, and everybody's going to be cool with that.
It sort of seems like they also set up like an alternate music business of some kind. You know, they had their own merchandising, their own record company for a while.
One of the things it means is money. I mean, I oftentimes think if the whole kind of counterculture notion of what the Grateful Dead was supposed to represent was it ever hard to balance that with all the money they made, and not like in terms of merchandising and like even down to Cherry Garcia ice cream. Like, was there ever any tension there?
The fans were accepting of the fact that they were multimillionaires. Whereas, I mean, like in punk rock or, well, in hip hop it's okay, but in punk rock or some alternative groups, you know, there seems to be this constant sort of almost like being ashamed or struggling with the fact that you're successful. Not that the Dead flaunted it, but they continue to be very well.
Yeah, but you got to remember that I mean, even though a lot of people did it cheaply, you can't just go off and follow the Dead for 3 months or whatever, unless you've got some kind of capital reserve and
trustafarian.
Well, I mean, it's
trust fund.
Yeah,
exactly. Because I mean, it's kind of hard to just lay off your job for 3 months and then come back and have everything be copacetic.
Yeah.
Yeah, but the thing it goes back to that whole thing about what music represents. I mean, music these days seems to represent something that's larger than the music itself. It seems to be a microcosm of a generation, or a microcosm of how someone feels about their own life. And like the punk thing, everyone who listened to a lot of punk music in my high school thought of themselves as iconoclasts. And like most of them are now, you know, insurance brokers. And, you know, that's the most amusing part of it. You know what I mean? Yeah, you know, they're like, you know, more than what their fathers that they rebelled against were. But you know, it's like the music. It really was like one time I was asking a guy about punk music, and finally he said, "Look, man," in very exasperated tones, "it's not about the music. It's not about the music. That's not the point." And I think with the Dead, it started with the music, and it was about the music.
Did you have much of an interaction with that larger culture at all when you were around them? Like, did you get a side of it?
Well, they started coming to my shows.
Excellent.
You know what I mean? They'd come to jazz shows, and the difference was, like when I was playing with Sting, the Sting fans would come to the jazz shows and kind of sit through it and go, "What the hell is this?" And then they'd come backstage and they'd say, "Yeah, I loved you with Sting. Good night." You know, the Dead fans, who you can pretty much tell they're Deadheads when they come in. You
fairly
know, the
identifiable,
sandals and then we're playing, jazz, and all of a sudden you see people in the audience, whoa, screaming, you know, and they're like talking about the records that they bought since they heard me with Jerry and the boys. I got all your records now, and this is the one I like, and play this song, and every now and then you hear somebody in the back of the room say, Dog Star, dude! You know, so it's like when they really like you with the band, they take you in.
Do you feel like it really opened them up musically? Like it turned them on to, like, say, your stuff or other stuff that they might not normally have gotten to?
It's not that it opens them up musically, because they're pretty open to begin with. Right. That's one of the things you notice at a Dead show that's completely different. The opening act at a Dead show is actually listened to. Mm-hmm. Whereas in other concerts, it's just something going on, it's background, while the people literally turn their back to the audience and talk to each other, or go have a hot dog, or walk around, or sit on the phone. They actually sit down and they listen to the opening act, no matter how many they were. And that's the first thing that caught me. It's like, wow, they're actually listening to what we're playing. You know, like we played a New Year's show with the Dead ones, with this band that I put together for it.
Oh, that's like their big show.
Yeah.
The New Year's show.
And I had a band. I was in town actually playing with my jazz band, and I put together this band with Kevin Eubanks and Bob Hurst and Jeff Watts, and it was all this music that Kevin and I wrote in like the late 70s when the fusion thing was really big. And we just brought this music back out and called the band the X-Men after the comic book. You know? And we started playing all this music, this really wild sounding stuff that's really like that Mahavishnu bridge between like jazz and like advanced harmony. And when we never played it again, and I still have Deadheads coming up and saying, man, that music you guys played at that show back in 82, I think it was, you know, when is that coming out on record, you know? And they have the tapes. That's one of the things I always did like about the Dead.
Yeah. So well, you know, what is it about them that that creates that kind of environment where that can happen, that kind of openness?
Well, I think what it is, and you were right about them being really open to a lot of different kinds of musical experience. And it's more like, for them, the Grateful Dead were not teachers so much as guides. Say, hey, this is kind of cool. I mean, because the thing I was thinking of when you were talking about them coming to your shows, I did an interview a couple years ago with Mickey Hart when he was working with the Library of Congress. Now, he's really into ethnomusicology, you know, that taping jungle tribe music and folk music from all over the place. He spent money and time editing stuff of rainforest tribal music that was then released from the Library of Congress tapes. And he did it because he was really interested in it. But he also recognized that if Deadheads found out that Mickey Hart was into this, someone would go check it out. And it would get this music a bigger audience than it would have gotten if it just came out as a Smithsonian release. And I think what the thing is once you're in a situation where you're comfortable with the people in that crowd, and one of them says, hey, this is cool, check it out, you'll trust them more than you'll trust some guy in a suit on a TV show saying, hey, this is this is cool, check it out.
That's something about them, and I think as far as people going to check out more music, we'll be coming back to check out some more about Garcia's legacy and his life and what it all meant now that he's gone.
Walk used to be about rebellion.
It's obnoxious. Commercial crap.
Never liked them.
Great guitar player.
Always have hated it.
JD, since the Grateful Dead were really about what happened on stage, about that kind of moment when something spontaneous would happen when they were playing, how is this going to affect their legacy? It's not really a question of records, is it?
Well, it is and it isn't. I think what's going to happen is that the albums that are currently in print ultimately are going to matter less than the concert tapes and so forth that are either in circulation or in the vaults. I mean, the Grateful Dead have amazing vaults for their own stuff, and I think the two releases that have been out on the Dick's Picks series are probably indicative of what the future Grateful Dead releases are going to be like. And if that's the case, yeah, Garcia's legacy will hold up.
Right, Scott?
Yeah, I agree with JD. I first heard Grateful Dead on like tapes of the shows for years before I even heard a Grateful Dead record, and I think that's the way it'll progress the same way for years to come.
Amy, what's your picture?
Well, I remember a couple of years ago I was in the studio with a Tribe Called Quest, and they were pulling all the records out of the crate that they were going to sample for the record, and they had like a whole mess of Dead records, and I went, what the hell are you sampling that for? And they looked at me like, you crazy white girl, what are you, nuts? This is the best stuff to sample. So I'm thinking maybe in some way that may, because they're not the only musicians I know who get that influence. I think that's how it may live on, through vinyl, that way.
Branford?
I'm in agreement with everyone here.
There you go. You can come back.
The live
exactly. That's the kind of guest we like.
Yeah, the live tapes. I mean, the stuff that's going to come out of the vaults is going to be great.
Maybe Jerry Garcia's best legacy is the kind of freedom that he represented. Thanks for joining us on Four on the Floor, and thanks very much to Branford for coming here on short notice. See you again next week.
Thank you for watching Cleveland Live Music. Don't worry, this cop that's approaching is not going to interrupt great uploads. He hopefully supports the channel as much as you folks who hit the subscribe button do. There's Patreon and GoFundMe information that I doubt he's going to do. But you can. But subscribe. Keep watching. That's all that counts.